Subcommittee and Representative Esposito, CS for House Bill 1503, a bill to be entitled An Act Relating to Citizens Property Insurance Corporation.
Representative Esposito, you're recognized to explain your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill allows surplus lines to do takeouts of non-primary residences of Citizens Insurance.
Representative Cassell, you're recognizing questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Esposito, can you point me to the section in your bill that will mandate reductions in insurance premiums for Floridians?
I don't think that's in the bill, Representative Cassell. You got another question?
Sort of my point, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Representative Esposito, turning to line 1353, where you define eligible risks in your bill, you identify personal lines residential and commercial lines residential risks as the two lines eligibles for citizens takeouts. I just want to confirm that your bill makes individual residential condominium units eligible for this takeout by surplus lines if they meet the other underwriting requirements.
Representative Esposito, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes.
Follow-up, Representative Cassell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Based on your answer, I have a lot of snowbirds that live in my district. They live in condos for 6 months out of the year. Is this the type of policy that would be eligible for a takeout from an eligible surplus lines carrier under your bill?
Representative Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes.
Representative Cassell, we're on a roll. You got another question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Esposito, turning to line 2319 of the bill, where it defines primary residence as primary home. What do you mean by a primary home pursuant to the bill?
Representative Esposito.
What line was that on again? Sorry.
Yeah, Representative Cassell, what line was that on?
Line 2319. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You're recognized. Representative Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I apologize. Can you repeat your question?
I'm sorry. Yep. Please repeat the question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Happily, on line 2319, where the bill defines primary residence, we define that as primary home. What do you mean by primary home under the bill?
Representative Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You have to live there more than 9 months of the year.
Representative Cassell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can you please explain to me the criteria where OIR will determine whether a form or a rate would make a surplus insurer ineligible for a Citizens Insurer takeout policy?
Representative Esposito, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So OIR will have the ability to decline an application for any reason that they don't believe the program will be successful.
Representative Cassell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does OIR have the same ability to regulate rates and forms of surplus lines carriers as they do admitted carriers?
Representative Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No.
Follow-up, Representative Cassell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The bill states that OIR has to review the takeout rate and plan, but does not provide specifics as to what policy form or rate criteria is actually required to participate in the Citizens Takeout Plan. Can you explain to me the criteria in form and rate that would make a surplus lines insurer eligible for this program?
Representative Esposito, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. They will apply the same standards that they currently do.
Follow-up, Representative Cassell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. They will apply what standards to what they currently do to what types of policies, considering they're not currently eligible to take out citizens' policies right now.
Representative Esposito, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. They'll apply the same criteria as they do to admitted companies.
Representative Cassell, you're on a roll. I hope your daddy's watching. He'd be proud of you today. He should have been here today. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. An admitted carrier taking policies out of Citizens must provide the consumer the insurance contract, which is approved by OIR. Surplus lines carriers are not required to have their insurance contracts approved. The bill requires surplus lines carriers taking policies from Citizens to use the Citizens contract for the remainder of the policy term. After that policy term expires, how are we going to ensure consumers aren't going to be shifted to an unapproved insurance contract with terms that we would not have approved from an admitted carrier?
Representative Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It will be reviewed in their takeout plan.
Representative Cassell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After the initial takeout contract ends, does your bill require that the surplus lines insurer come back to OIR for rate approval? And if so, please point me to the line in the bill where that can be found.
Representative Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It does not.
Representative Cassell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After the eligible surplus lines insurers takes over the citizens' policies and takes the unearned premium from our consumers, how long does your bill require the surplus lines insurer to stay at that premium amount before they are able to raise rates without OIR's approval?
Representative Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It would apply to whatever amount of time was left on the citizens' policy.
Our viewership is going up. Keep them coming. Representative Cassell, you're recognized for further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the answer, but my question was specifically in relation to after that first policy term ends, after the takeout, and the surplus lines carrier renews, how long are they going to be required to stay at the premium that they accepted from citizens before they raise Floridians' rates?
Representative Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's not addressed in this bill.
Representative Cassell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When a policy is taken out of citizens by an admitted carrier, they have the protection against the carrier's potential insolvency from the Florida Insurance Guarantee Association. Surplus lines carriers are ineligible from FIGA and historically have gone insolvent. How will we protect consumers under your bill from the potential insolvency of a surplus lines carrier?
Representative Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Surplus lines don't tend to go insolvent, and outside of that, the solvency of these companies are not addressed in this bill. I think that we have a general issue with insolvency in insurance companies as a whole, whether they're admitted or not.
Last one, Representative Cassell. Then we'll go to Representative Escamani for the remaining time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And going back to my question, the concern is when surplus lines carriers go insolvent, which historically they have been known, it has happened, they are not eligible or not required to participate in FIGA. How are we going to ensure that Floridians are protected in the event a surplus lines carrier goes insolvent if they don't have access to FIGA?
Members, stop the clock. Welcome back to her home, former member and current Senator Tracy Davis. All right, back to Representative Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The bill has a financial rating in order to protect Floridians from having surplus lines go insolvent.
3 minutes left. Representative Escamani can fill that easily. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And honestly, I was like, do I have any more questions? That was fabulous. But one quick question. Do surplus lines insurance companies typically charge higher rates than admitted insurance companies?
Representative Esposito, you're recognized. Y'all making me tired.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It varies.
It varies. All right, it varies. Another question, or I'll go back to Representative Cassell. She's got lots of questions. Representative Cassell, you bring us home. 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Esposito, with the understanding that surplus lines carriers' forms are not required currently to be approved by OIR, they will have some oversight if they participate in this takeout program. The forms that they currently use that are in today's policies, are those forms going to be grandfathered in, and the only new forms that need to be accepted have to be presented to OIR, or are they going to have to present their complete policy to be eligible for this program?
Representative Esposito, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. OIR will have to review and address that.
Representative Cassell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Throughout the bill, we see the word standard policy. What is a standard policy?
Representative Esposito, standard policy is what?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can you clarify whether you mean for an admitted carrier or for citizens?
Representative Cassell, you're recognized.
That is a great question, Representative Esposito. Can you tell me, for purposes of surplus lines carriers, what a standard policy would be?
Representative Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It would vary, and it's something that OIR would address.
Representative Cassell, last question.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Throughout the bill references a producing agent. Surplus lines companies do not actually appoint insurance agents. What happens to an insurance agent who is associated with the policy, has the relationship with the policyholder, when a surplus lines company removes that policy from Citizens? Are we jeopardizing the consumer and that agency relationship by putting them into a surplus lines company that doesn't have that same way of procuring a policy?
Representative Esposito, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are not.
Last question, 20 seconds left. Representative Hillary Bulldog Cassell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe it's line 1177, but I could be wrong. We talk about a surplus lines policyholder gets a pass on Citizens deficit assessments. Can you tell me why we would give a pass on deficit assessments?
Representative Cassell, do you know the answer to that?
I actually do not,
Okay,
Mr.
all right,
Speaker.
good. All right, Representative Esposito, do you know the answer to that?
You said 1177?
Yeah, you're recognized.
That might be in the amendment, Mr. Speaker, so I'll withdraw that.
All right, withdraw. Time has expired. In this exciting question and answer period, we're going to move to amendments. Are there any?
On the desk, Mr. Speaker.
Read the First Amendment.
Representative Esposito offer the following amendment with title amendment, barcode 681737, remove lines 1345 through 3089, and insert an amendment.
Representative Esposito, you're recognized to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment positions the bill to match the Senate companion.
Round two, Representative Cassell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Esposito, turning to line 15 through 18 of your amendment, the amendment states that OIR will review rates for comparable coverage. What is the standard for determining what comparable coverage is?
Representative Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That will be determined by OIR.
Representative Cassell.
As an example, going back to that question, surplus lines carriers can require Floridians to resolve their disputes regarding claims in states that are not Florida, and they can even force them to resolve disputes outside of the country in places like London, which is a huge expense to the consumer and often takes places in states without the same laws and consumer protections that we enjoy here. If a policy requires a consumer to participate in dispute resolution outside of the state under your bill, would that be considered comparable coverage and force consumers into the surplus market?
Representative Esposito, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's for OIR to decide.
Follow up, Representative Cassell.
Anybody else? Go.
I think she's run out of gas. I don't know. Bring her some Gatorade. Last two questions, Representative Escamani.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I guess I'm curious. I know on the 20% that we talked about earlier, if there's a surplus line that's more than 20%, this homeowner would not be eligible for Citizens, and that doesn't change with your amendment, correct?
Representative Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's a 20% premium cap, so if the surplus lines come back with a takeout offer of more than 20%, then the insurance policy can stay with Citizens.
Representative Escamani, and then I'll go to Representative Joseph for the last question.
Thank you so much. How about someone who's not in Citizens and want to go into Citizens? If there's a 20% protection apply in that situation?
Representative Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's not addressed in this bill.
Representative Joseph for the last question.
I actually don't have a question. Thank you very much.
We got 2 minutes left. 2 minutes. Does anybody have a question? All right, Representative Cassell, bring us home. Land the plane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The bill references the reliance on a wind pool area to determine what policies are going to qualify under this new takeout program. How long ago was that the wind pool was created 22 years ago to determine that eligibility? Why are we relying on such an outdated piece of data to make these determinations?
Representative Esposito, you're
Thank you.
recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The bill doesn't address that.
You got time for another one. Representative Cassell. You got to get to the back page.
I'm on like page 4.
You're recognized.
I don't have any further questions.
Anybody else have a question that hasn't been exhausted? Representative Cassell, I want to commend you as an insurance agent that's been licensed for 42 years. Those were excellent questions. And now the time has expired.